Hello, back again on the Top Recap channel. This time I will tell a movie's entitled Out of the Furnace. Let's get straight into the storyline. The story begins by showing people watching a film in their respective cars. Then, we are introduced to a man named Harlan. It is known that Harlan is a former soldier who is very arrogant. In fact, he is now the leader of the bandits. When Harlan was drinking a drink while accompanied by his girlfriend, he accidentally choked. Seeing this, his girlfriend laughed and told Harlan to be careful. However, the arrogant Harlan immediately became angry and tortured his girlfriend. One of the visitors who saw Harlan's behavior immediately got out of the car and tried to stop him. However, Harlan did not accept this and beat him up. After that, Harlan drove away, leaving his girlfriend alone. The scene moves to a metal factory in the city. We are introduced to one of the factory employees, Russell. It turns out that Russell has been working at the factory for 3 years and spends almost every day there. While on his way home, Russell accidentally saw his younger brother's car parked at a horse racing gambling place. Russell immediately parked his car and went inside to meet his younger brother.
Are you kidding?
It is known that Russell's younger brother is named Rodney. Russell asked Rodney to come out for a while.
Where are you getting the money?
Here, Russell asked where Rodney always got the betting money from. At first, Rodney did not want to confess, but because he was constantly pressed, he finally said that he always got loans from a loan shark named John. Rodney is also finally honest that he already owes John a lot of money and hasn't been able to repay it. Russell, who heard that, was certainly annoyed, but he also cared deeply for his younger brother, so he didn't have the heart to scold him or be rude. In fact, Russell promises that when he gets his next paycheck, he will try to help pay Rodney's debt to John. The next day, Russell went to his father's house, who was seriously ill. His father lives with his uncle and also Rodney. We are then told that Rodney, the younger brother, is a soldier who will soon be deployed to Iraq.
I'm Pops, I gotta go to work.
One night, Russell goes to a bar in the center of town. It turns out that Russell's purpose in arriving there is to meet John, the loan shark. When Russell is about to approach John, he hears someone threatening him because John does not want to cooperate in distributing illegal drugs. Apparently, the person who threatened John is Harlan, the bandit leader. Here, Harlan was a little annoyed with Russell because he was rude for just walking in. But Russell replied that he also had business with John. After that, John asked what Russell's purpose was for coming to him. Russell immediately gave some money to John because it turned out that he came to pay off Rodney's debt, his younger brother's. Unfortunately, the money was still lacking, and Russell promised to pay it off after the next payday. Before leaving, Russell was served a glass of drink as a thank you for paying the debt. However, on his way home, Russell accidentally hits a car that suddenly passes by. The accident killed a child and his mother who were in the car. Because Russell was still under the influence of the alcohol he drank earlier, he was eventually found guilty and had to stay in prison for 3 years. While in prison, Rodney visited Russell. Rodney says that their father is still sickly and is now cared for by their uncle. Meanwhile, Rodney himself was about to leave for Iraq for his first tour of duty as a soldier. Hearing that, Russell advised his younger brother to always take care of himself while on duty in Iraq. Russell also asked his younger brother to continue praying for their father's recovery. A few months later, Russell chose not to interact with the gangsters in prison. This was done because Russell did not want to be involved in any crimes in prison to get remission. However, this made some prisoners feel annoyed and considered Russell arrogant. One time, Russell was approached by 2 prisoners who immediately ganged up on him. A year passed, and Russell was again visited by Rodney, who had just returned from serving in Iraq. Here, Rodney informed them that their father had died 3 days ago. Hearing the sad news, Russell immediately burst into tears. Russell feels very guilty that he couldn't take care of his father and is instead locked up in prison. Long story short, because Russell continued to behave well, he was finally released from prison within a fairly short time. He was immediately greeted by Rodney, who was ready to bring his brother home. On the way, Russell asked his younger brother to stop by their father's grave first. Later that night, Rodney told Russell that he had left the military because he did not want to return to serve in Iraq. Hearing this, Russell, as an older brother, still supported Rodney's decision. One day, Russell saw his ex-wife, who was now dating a policeman. Russell still loves her very much, but he realizes that he is not the person his ex-wife wants. Now Russell is back working at the metal factory. Although he is an ex-convict, the factory is still willing to accept him. Meanwhile, Rodney shows that he is now a street fighter. Rodney does this to pay off all his debts to John. While Russell is in prison, Rodney still often borrows money from John, a loan shark. Rodney, who should have relented at the time, continued to beat his opponent because his opponent had insulted their parents. This made John upset because John had placed a bet on Rodney's defeat. Here, Rodney could only apologize for breaking their agreement. He promised John that he would repay his debt in another fight. John, who thought Rodney could not control his emotions when fighting, then asked Rodney to just work in a metal factory with his brother. However, Rodney replied that he was ashamed to work as a factory laborer.
We'll talk later.
The next day, at home, Russell found a cloth covered in blood. When Russell saw his brother's hand, he realized that his brother had been a street fighter. Russell asked his brother to end it all and work in the metal factory with him. However, Rodney refuses and explains that the reason he became a street fighter was because he was depressed after returning from Iraq. The only thing that calmed him down was fighting.
Come work at the mill.
Fuck the mill. I gave my fucking life for this country, with his fucking head cut off.
A few days later, Russell was reckless enough to meet his ex-wife, who was a kindergarten teacher. There, Russell, who still loved her, boldly invited his ex-wife to get back together. However, with a heavy heart, his ex-wife refused. Russell asked if her refusal was because his ex-wife no longer loved him. Finally, the ex-wife explained that she was now pregnant with the child of her new boyfriend. Suddenly, this left Russell heartbroken and speechless.
That's wonderful news.
Wow, you're gonna be a hell of a mom.
I'm so sorry.
Meanwhile, on the other hand, Rodney met John at his residence. There, Rodney asked John to take him to the Ramapos area to fight. Ramapos is known to be an area inhabited by bandits, and street fights are often held with very large prizes. John asked why Rodney wanted to fight in Ramapos. Rodney replied that if he fought there, then the prize could immediately pay off all his debts. Hearing that, John, who still felt sorry for Rodney, explained that fighting there was very dangerous. The match organizers often cheated for their own interests. In fact, fighters often died there. However, the stubborn Rodney continued to push John to take him to fight there, regardless of the risks. Finally, John complied with Rodney's request and contacted the match organizer, who turned out to be Harlan.
Let me talk to him.
The next day, Russell was visited by his uncle to take Russell hunting. Russell, who happened to be heartbroken, of course, immediately accepted the invitation. On the other hand, Rodney has now traveled with John to Ramapos to meet Harlan. Upon arrival, John immediately introduces Rodney to Harlan because he is the one who will fight. However, Harlan is a little dismissive of Rodney's abilities, who doesn't look like a great fighter. Rodney, who was provoked by his emotions, said that he was a former soldier. Rodney also immediately invites Harlan to a duel to prove his skill. After that, Harlan asked Rodney why a soldier would want to fight with his own citizens. Rodney replied that it was all just for money. Then, Harlan sent Rodney out because he wanted to talk one-on-one with John.
I'll take care of this. Step out, Rodney.
After they made a deal, John went back to see Rodney. Here, John explains that if Rodney really wants the money, then Rodney should just lose the match they're having this afternoon. Initially, Rodney refused because he often failed to control his temper. However, this time, John really begged Rodney to give in to the match.
Did you hear me?
Yeah, I heard you.
Good. You can't embarrass the growth in front of these guys that he's got coming up.
At the same time, Russell and his uncle had just arrived in the forest to hunt. On one occasion, Russell found a deer and immediately aimed at the animal. However, when the trigger of his gun was about to be pulled, Russell suddenly felt sorry, so he didn't shoot the deer. In the afternoon, it shows Rodney, who is now going to fight. Before that, John again reminds Rodney that he wants to lose in this match because if Rodney wins, Harlan's group will definitely finish them both. After that, the fight began. In In the middle of the fight, Rodney was provoked by his enemy, so he continued to beat his enemy. John was immediately worried that Rodney would lose control again, so he went downstairs to shout at Rodney. After being yelled at several times, Rodney finally put his ego down. He immediately chose to remain silent when he was beaten back by his enemy. On the other hand, Russell and his uncle are about to return home. The scene returns to Rodney, who continues to be severely beaten by his enemy. Luckily, John immediately stops the match and takes Rodney out of the arena before the enemy can kill him. Not long after, Harlan approached Rodney and John. Here, Harlan immediately gave his money according to their previous agreement. Harlan also thanked Rodney, who was now helpless.
I was just reacting. I just lost it a little bit.
Later that night, Rodney and John decided to head home. John, who was afraid of being robbed, deliberately recorded all their conversations while passing through Ramapo's territory. A few minutes after that, they were actually robbed by several bandits who blocked the car. Apparently, the leader of the bandits was none other than Harlan. Initially, Harlan asked John to get out. However, because John refused, Harlan immediately finished him off. Apparently, Harlan did all this because he had a grudge against John, who had refused to cooperate in distributing illegal drugs. Then, Harlan asked his men to take Rodney to the middle of the forest. Once there, Rodney was immediately finished off by Harlan and buried there.
Okay.
On the other hand, Russell, who was already at home, accidentally found a letter written by Rodney. In the letter, Rodney explained that he apologized to his brother. He also mentioned that the fight was the last time, and after that, Rodney would work in a metal factory with his brother. The next morning, Russell was visited by a policeman named Wesley, who was the new boyfriend of his ex-wife. Russell initially thought that Wesley would be angry because yesterday, Russell invited back his ex-wife. However, it turns out that Wesley's arrival wants to talk about something else, and he immediately invites Russell to the police station. While at the police station, Russell was informed that John was found dead on a road in the Ramapos area. Meanwhile, Russell's younger brother, who was known to be with John at the time, has still not been found. The police had also found footage showing that the perpetrator of the crime was Harlan. Unfortunately, no one in Ramapos would cooperate or show them where Harlan was. After that, Russell, who doubted the police's work, went to his uncle. Apparently, he wanted to invite his uncle to look for Harlan in the Ramapos area. On the same day, they both set out there. Upon arrival in the Ramapos area, Russell and his uncle tried to ask the residents about Harlan's whereabouts. Unfortunately, the residents always answered that they didn't know. Later that evening, Russell went to a place where bandits gathered. Russell, who was looking for Harlan this time, pretended to want to buy illegal drugs from them. At first, they suspected that Russell was an undercover cop, but fortunately, one of them knew that Russell was an ex-con he had seen in prison. Then, Russell was brought into their headquarters to deliver the illicit drugs. After receiving the drug, Russell asked where Harlan was. Suddenly, the bandits were shocked because the place Russell came to was now Harlan's headquarters. After learning about the location of his headquarters, Russell rushed off to organize a strategy. However, while on the road, they were approached by a policeman. The policeman said that Russell and his uncle had to return home immediately, because if Russell intervened in his younger brother's case, the police would rearrest him. This was because the police were afraid that Russell and his uncle would disrupt the investigation. The next day, Wesley visits Russell. Wesley said that Rodney had been found dead and his body buried in a forest. Wesley promised that he and the other police officers would arrest Harlan soon, but he begged Russell not to do anything first and to leave the case to the police. Russell finally complies with Wesley and tells him about the location of Harlan's base, which he visited last night. Long story short, the police tried to raid Harlan's headquarters based on information from Russell. Unfortunately, by that time, Harlan and all his men had already escaped.
Yeah, I was expecting this.
Several months passed, but the police were never able to catch Harlan. This clearly upset Russell, so he was determined to avenge Harlan's crimes by himself. Russell then went to John's residence to find Harlan's phone number. John's confidant, Den, had warned Russell not to deal with Harlan. However, Russell remained reckless and told Den to leave the place and not come back for a few weeks. After finding Harlan's phone number, Russell immediately contacted him and asked him to meet at John's headquarters at 4 a.m. Russell reasoned that he would buy a large amount of illegal drugs because he had managed to take over all of John's money. At 4 a.m., Harlan and one of his men arrived at John's residence. Russell immediately hid to lure Harlan and his men in. Inside, Harlan met Den, even though Russell had warned Den to leave immediately.
Well, do you know where Patty keeps his money?
Not me, no.
Then, Russell went inside and finished off Harlan's men. However, when he wanted to approach Harlan, Harlan first finished off Den and then rushed away from the place.
God damn.
Russell continued to chase Harlan until, at one point, he caught up with him and they engaged in a duel. Luckily, Russell managed to win the duel. He shot Harlan in the leg and told him to walk. As Harlan walked, Russell shot him again. Here, Russell told Harlan that he was the older brother of Rodney, the man Harlan had killed and his body buried in the forest. Then, Harlan walked back in the hope that Russell would forgive him. But at the same time, Wesley arrives and immediately tells Russell not to kill Harlan. Wesley also warned that Russell could go back to prison if he did. However, Russell, who desperately wanted to avenge his brother's death without thinking, immediately shot Harlan in the head. After all these events, we are shown that Russell was not jailed because Wesley covered up the incident, as if Wesley was the one who killed Harlan.